I think it's very far from the imagination of many of my friends, because when I told them about my new system I invented, they looked at me in awe and I mean, you are an actor, you're not an accountant. What are you doing? This is going down. You will lose. Never ever is this going to work out.
27-year-old Feliz Kammerer made his film debut playing Paul Bäumer. The main character in Netflix's All Quiet on the Western Front, which follows a group of young German soldiers on the front line in the First World War. His months spent covered in mud and being out in the cold have clearly paid off, as his stellar performance has resulted in a record-breaking 14 BAFTA and 9 Oscar nominations for the film. Felix joins me now. First of all, congratulations. It must feel quite intimidating to have stepped into this new medium and then find yourself kind of the focal point of attention across the globe.
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's totally new to me, because in theater, we obviously don't get that much attention. But still, I think it's great for the movie that so many people can see it, and this topic gets to be seen by so many countries and gets recognized in so many different ways, like the BAFTAs or the Oscars.
I mean, of course, this is a story that speaks to the futility of war and also the, hideous violence and carnage. Do you think it's a particularly important story for people to be revisiting now? We're watching a war go on in Europe that we thought would never happen again, many of us foolishly, perhaps naively.
Yeah, I think maybe that's exactly the point why it's necessary just now, because we felt safe in Europe for the last centuries, and it's somehow it's weird that this episode comes back over and over again. First World War, Second World War. In Europe, we had in Yugoslavia, we had those wars, and it just reappears, and we are wondering, what is it that we can't make that stop? So maybe that's just exactly the right time to watch this movie and to get people to really concentrate on that topic again.
You've talked about how we do focus quite a lot on World War II, which is true, but that perhaps we do so less with the First World War, and actually it's particularly relevant right now. Why do you think that war in particular?
Well, of course, the Second World War, with all its atrocities, obviously has come to our attention more frequently than the First World War. But it's weird, because the First World War was more or less the spark or the initiating point of modern warfare. We saw machine guns emerge, so many inventions that helped kill people, and to focus on this war is maybe a help to understand war itself better.
I think you certainly understand some aspects of war better after your experience of making the film. I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on that experience. I think you said it was one of the hardest things physically that you've ever gone through, if not the hardest thing. I was particularly taken with this quote about the fact that by the end of the day, working in those wool uniforms that, would have been worn by soldiers in the trenches, they were 100 pounds heavier? It can't be 100 pounds heavier by the end of the day.
Yeah, that it was unbelievable, because I knew there would be a lot of physical stuff going on, but so I trained for 3.5, 4 months with a weight jacket, just to get used to some weight on my body while training, running. And the jacket was, I think it was 10 kilos. But that was quite optimistic, because these uniforms, they are made of felt, like they were in the days back, and they suck up water so well. and of course mud too. And then you have the equipment, which is made of steel or some sort of metal. And after one day, we weighed the whole uniform with the equipment, and because of the water and the mud, it was around 90 to 100 pounds. So imagine running with that weight for 16 hours a day in knee-deep mud, trying not to step on any explosions.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it obviously brought home to you what those boys, one of whom you were playing, went through during that terrible war, and you know, and you going through it. You said it was one of the hardest things you've ever done, and that's without the threat of imminent death.
Yeah.
You know, and the very, you know, the reality. I mean, I'm sure you weren't wrapped, surrounded, and all of the other things that were so terrible in the trenches. Did it give you a sort of an insight into what their experience was, a further insight into what their experience was, and were you baffled that human beings could even live through that?
Yeah, somehow I got an insight in these times and in war, but of course you play this character, you are afraid, you realize how it might have felt to lose your comrades, your friends, your family, but still in the end, after a long shooting day, we were brought back home to our apartments. We laid down in our cozy beds and had something to eat. And that's something the boys in the First World War, and still today, I mean, in Ukraine, it's just the same. That's something that does not exist. You can't just go home and warm up and have a shower. So to some degree, I learned what it must have felt to be there. But I think it would be a lie to tell people I know what war feels like.
You did a lot of research even before you started filming. Maybe that's the stage actor in you. But I think one of the things you did was delve into an archive and read up to 2,500 letters from those young men writing home from the front, many of them redacted with information removed and so on. I imagine that must have been very emotionally wearing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you find that?
Yeah, it's horrifying, because you sit at home in your flat and you look at your computer, you have a coffee next to your computer, and you read through 2,500 letters of nearly no information. And that's so hard to realize, that these letters, they were sent back home to calm down family and friends. But if you if you dive in, you realize how afraid those people must have been and how little they knew, because now we know how the war ended and how it went. But if you read letters from 1914 and you read, I'm so glad we are coming home in a few weeks, it will be over soon. And you know, oh, no, it's going on for another 4 years at least. You know, it's horrific.
Tell me a little bit about the place that because the film is based obviously on the novel of the same name, All Quiet on the Western Front, and it really is a sort of seminal text in the German-speaking world. Tell me a little bit about the position it holds, and whether you felt any nervousness about approaching that story, because it has been retold before and it carries an awful lot of weight with it in terms of Germany's war history, and you know, it's so much more than just the story itself, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The book itself, of course, has a huge history in German literature, not only in German but in world literature. It's the most printed and read German book in the world, and that's of course a weight. There's it gives you some pressure to really yeah to really not make any mistakes in the process of making this movie. But at the same time, you have so much material and such a wonderful language from Erich Maria Remarque, who wrote the book. And it just touches the point of war so well. So I think there is a reason why it was read so often and translated so often. And in Germany, it's of course well known, but I guess its popularity has decreased since we have had films like Saving Private Ryan and 1917. People start watching movies more than they read these quote old books, so I think to give this book, this amazing piece of literature, another language on screen is just a huge opportunity.
It's also quite unusual still to see the German side of war. I don't know if that's true in German-speaking countries. You yourself are Austrian, but here in the UK, you could probably name on one hand the really big ones. Das Boot, A Lion in Winter, All Quiet on the Western Front, the various adaptations. Does that still present challenges in terms of emotive challenges in the German-speaking world, in terms of how war and Germany's part in it has been portrayed?
Yeah, it's weird because of course Germany has, me as an Austrian, I feel somehow attached to this history, of course, because we just were part of this evolution of war, and just like the Germans. But to see this story done again in German language especially, just gives it another touch, another detail that really brings it to the point of the book. And also the storytelling from a German director with a German producer and the German team. That's just a quality many movies couldn't reach, or just couldn't just get their hands on, because if you see movies from America, war movies, or from Britain, it's always from the view of the winners, of course, and those are great movies. But to really tell a story about war and about the atrocities from German perspective, I think you need a German team, and that's maybe something that adds more depth to it, or more, I don't know, more self-reflecting quality.
Do you think it's an indication then of the complexity that's still around, that still surrounds, German war history, German-speaking war history, that some, because it's been kind of universally acclaimed outside of Germany, but I know that some German critics have been very sort of sniffy about it and called it sort of Oscar porn and so on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I guess, the thing is, if you're dealing with a book that's so deeply embedded in public consciousness and so revered, it's very difficult not to attract criticism for, I don't know, commercializing it in some way.
Yeah, I think that happens with everything, with movies, with books, with theater works. You always, if you touch a topic that is relevant, you see it by people criticizing it. And I think that the positive opinions, they just overweigh, and we are just flattered by so many nominations at the awards. And of course, then there are also people who criticize it, maybe because it's very well done, and because you really immerse into this story and start thinking about yourself, maybe about your own family, about people who came before you, and that's maybe not the worst thing to happen.
Felix, I think that what we haven't talked about is the state of shock you must be in, because this is literally, I think, your first film role. Up until this point, you've been a stage actor. So it's quite, it's quite a leap, isn't it, to go from, performing really good work at a theatre in Austria and suddenly to be, conducting media interviews across the globe for a film that looks set to carry away quite a lot of the awards this year. How are you adjusting to it?
Oh my God, I don't know. I really don't know. It's just, it's flying past, and I just let it flow off. And I'm just so happy for this movie to get this recognition. And like you said, it's my very first film role ever, and to see it as an opportunity. And I mean, it's a gift that Edward Berger, the director, gave to me. This movie, that he led me through this process and let me be part of it. And now we see it all worked out. And he taught me how to make films. And he taught me how to deal with all this circus that is going on at the moment. But luckily, what overweighs all these crazy times and nominations and interviews is just the happiness for the success the movie has.
But Felix, is it now like goodbye stage, hello screen? It's definitely a different wage packet eventually, which must be quite appealing.
Yeah, you see, I love theater, and I started working in theater, and theater is, I consider theater somehow my home, my base, because that's where I learned to act, and that's how I was educated in acting school. And I think I would not turn my back to theater for the rest of my life, but I want to do more movies now because I really started liking it. And
but interestingly, you said about the process of making the film, that in theatre you follow a linear narrative, and you know where you're going. Whereas with the movie, there was a sense at times that you didn't have any idea of how it would fit together, and would it fit together, and would it make any sense, because you're performing scenes out of sequence. It's quite a different experience, isn't it?
It's quite frankly, it's hell. It's absolute hell. If you come from theater and you're used to play the whole thing from start to finish, and suddenly you're confronted with the situation where you have to start on your very first shooting day with one of your very last scenes in the film. You think, oh, how am I going to do this? I don't think this is going to work out very well. Are you sure I'm the right person to do this? But luckily, I came up with a system, probably out of despair. Because
yes, I want to know about this because, obviously we have the stereotype of German speakers as being particularly organized and and I'm afraid that you've just bought into the cliche for us, hook, line and sinker. Describe your system, Felix.
Yeah. So I am very organized and very logic. And I also like creating my characters in a very logical way. And that came quite handy for this character in All Quiet on the Western Front, for the continuity, where I came up with a system of an Excel spreadsheet that organized the whole character in different scenes, and each scene was connected to multiple categories and levels of energy.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's obviously very, very clever and very sensible thing to have done, but it's so far from my imagination.
I think it's very far from the imagination of many of my friends, because when I told them about my new system I invented, they looked at me in awe. And I mean, you are an actor, you're not an accountant. What are you doing? This is going down. You will lose. Never ever is this going to work out.
So just explain to our listeners, I think I got the gist of it. You know, you'd have a day marked out for a 75% energy day, and another day might only be 35%, but another day might be 95%. And what would you do if more energy was required of you, seeing as you weren't
Well,
sleeping about 4 hours a night, as I understand it?
yeah, exactly. Somehow that worked. Also, I really don't know how we did not all get sick. But at the same, so this system, it works. I have a number for a scene, say a scene 24. And this scene is a scene where Paul is afraid and he needs to kill someone else. And then I have different categories like fear of death. And another category is need to kill. And another category is, you get the point. And each category has a level of energy. So it goes, from 0 to 100. And then I have another category for the pulse. And it goes like the pulse from, I think, 30 or 40 to up to 180, 190, 200. And in the end, when you have the whole Excel spreadsheet finished, it looks like a text sheet. And you see in various diagrams, you see the development of the character. So if I arrive in the morning on set, when I arrive, I see, okay, today we're shooting scene 120. I have to get into this exact mood.
And get your pulse rate up or get it down.
Exactly. And you can also emphasize the next scene in that one, even if you're shooting the next scene 2 weeks later.
It makes an awful lot of sense, but it sounds like an awful lot of work, I have to
Yes,
say.
it is.
I wondered, lastly, really, the character of Paul, how would you describe him and how much do you think he bears a resemblance to the young men from Ukraine and Russia who are currently battling in some similar circumstances in that horrible war?
Paul is, it's really a very interesting character to work on because he's so neutral and he's so normal. Just like millions of others in the First World War and like many, many others now in Ukraine. So he's mostly the most typical young boy who has to go to war you can imagine. And that's a bit difficult to play because you don't want to give too much detail. Otherwise, it gets a biopic somehow. But at the same time, you want to be an interesting character. You don't want to bore people or you want them to feel that it's a real person. So I think he is just like all of us if we would have gone to war. And that's why we see this story from his perspective.
Just finally, incredibly superficially, who are you most looking forward to meeting at the Oscars or the BAFTAs or the very many film awards that you're attending? Or who have you enjoyed meeting so far?
Well, when we were at the Globes, I I had my little fanboy moment when I met Colin Farrell. And because I'm a huge fan, and he's the lead in my most favorite film of all times, The Lobster.
Oh, really?
Yes, I watch, I think, 4 or 5 times a year. Just, it's like a mantra. And I went to him and I told him, oh, hi, I'm Felix. Maybe you want to take a picture with me. And I just wanted to tell you, I really loved your performance and you're my most favorite actor. So that was amazing. And maybe we're going to meet again at the Oscars. And I will approach him again and I will tell him, oh, maybe you remember me from the Golden Globes. And maybe we can have another chat. I'm blushing. I'm such a fanboy.
I'm absolutely sure he's going to remember you. He's in with a very good chance of winning the Best Actor award, isn't he?
Yeah.
Did you like In Bruges? Have you seen his film?
You mean Banshees of Inisherin?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it, and I loved it that he reconnected with his colleague, you know, from with Gleason, because it's so great to see Bruges. Is it called Bruges in English?
In Bruges, yeah.
In Bruges, yeah. And this couple, these two boys, and now you see them in the same constellation, but it's just a complete different movie, and it's so well done, and it's really the art of acting.
Well, Felix, I'm sure we're never going to have to say to you, you used to be nice. Which is my favorite line from that film. You used to be nice. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, look forward to seeing what you do next. Do you know what you're going to do next?
There are some plans, and they're getting concrete now, but I'm not allowed to talk about it.
Of course you're not. Felix Kammerer, no worries. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.